Welcome to a special presentation on redistricting. I'm Elaine Manley with the League of Women Voters of Cupertino and Sunnyvale. And with us today, we are delighted to have Jonathan Mehta Stein with us. He is the Executive Director of the California Common Cause and a resident expert in redistricting. As you can see from his fabulous bio here, he's a civil rights attorney, tremendous amount of experience. He was the head of the Voting Rights and Census Program for the Asian Americans Advancing Justice and the Asian Law Caucus. He's worked as a voting rights staff attorney for the ACLU. He's received his degrees from Berkeley and also a student regent at the University of California's Board of Regents. Prior to that, he spent 4 years at Mother Jones Magazine. Once again, we are delighted to have you here presenting redistricting to our community. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you so much, Elaine. I am pleased to be joining all of you this evening to talk about redistricting and about not just the importance of redistricting generally, but also about redistricting in the city of Sunnyvale. Common Cause is an organization that has been working on democracy reform for years, much like the League of Women Voters. Here in California, we use voting rights, redistricting reform, money and politics reform, and other democracy-related projects to try to build a better and more inclusive California democracy, one that is responsive to everyday people and reflective of California's communities. You can see here at the bottom the sorts of topics that we work on in California. Today, as Elaine mentioned, we're going to be focused on redistricting. Now, why do we redistrict? First and foremost, the decennial census is conducted every decade to count the federal population. And then district lines at every level of our politics are redrawn using the new census data to account for population changes and to make sure that everyone has equal representation. What does that mean? Well, populations move and shift and evolve. People move between states and within states. And if you had a huge surplus of people in one new area, but you kept districts the same, you might have way more people in one district than in another, or way more people in one city council district than another. And the people who are packed tightly into that one district are going to have less access to representation. They will be splitting one representative among more people. And so to make sure that everyone has an equal share of representation, we redraw district lines at the congressional level, the state legislative level, the city council level, the county board of supervisors level, the school district level, at all levels of government. Now, in most instances, elected officials get to redraw their own district lines. That's the system that the United States uses. It allows sitting incumbent politicians to redraw district lines, and then very often they run for re-election in the lines they themselves have drawn. How is this process run? Well, California Common Cause and the League of Women Voters and a number of other organizations worked in 2019 to pass a law, AB 849, that we're going to get to in greater depth in just a few minutes, that overhauled how local redistricting works at the state level in California. It was the first reform of local redistricting law since the 1940s, and it requires, for the first time, some bare minimums around public participation and public outreach, translation access, and it sets basic criteria for how district lines should be drawn. So one of the things that it requires is that every jurisdiction, every city and county, specifically every city and county that redistricts has to hold a minimum of 4 hearings while doing so. It has to do some community outreach in the process. Racial gerrymandering is prohibited under federal law. Partisan gerrymandering is prohibited by state law, AB 849, but district lines can still be manipulated for incumbents to maintain their power and to help themselves get reelected. Now, that's often known as gerrymandering. So on the left, you're seeing the first gerrymander, maybe not the first gerrymander, but the first gerrymandering that earned the name gerrymander. Governor Eldridge Gerry drew a district in order to benefit himself and his political party. It looked like a salamander, and thus you got the name gerrymander. On the right, you have a graphical representation of how easy it is to gerrymander. So you have in these 3 different columns the same population with the same political spread of political ideologies. And in one, the center map, district map, what you see is that if you draw the district lines a particular way, a community that is a relatively even split politically results in one party getting all the representation. And then if you look on the far right column, you can see that you draw the districts in a different way, and you end up with representation that looks much more like the population's total overall political split. What I want to draw your attention to, and this is sort of a minor point, but it's a key one, is that the middle column, the one that entrenches power for one political party, uses simple geographic shapes. And the one that actually represents the lived political realities of people on the ground, it uses squiggly lines and weird corners. Now, neither are necessarily correct and neither are necessarily wrong. What I want to highlight here is that you can use simple geographic shapes to disenfranchise, and you can use squiggly lines to create good maps. The truth is that district lines have to be drawn with sensitivity and with specific attention to the lived experiences of communities on the ground. And oftentimes that is going to result in squiggly lines, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Squiggly lines themselves that look like, for example, a salamander are not necessarily a gerrymander, but they might be. So you might be thinking to yourself, surely there's no gerrymandering in California. This is a problem in other states. Or maybe you're thinking to yourself, this is the sort of thing that politicians do at the state level or with our congressional districts. It surely doesn't happen at the local level. Well, consider the city of Martinez, which was forced to undergo a districting process because of a CVRA claim. And it had a set of incumbents who lived relatively close to one another in the same part of town. And if they drew districts that had a relatively reasonable geographic spread, it would be likely that they would all end up in the same district or same couple districts, and they'd have to run against each other. And so what they did was they drew these long, slivery districts that kept themselves in power. And so what you see here is squiggly lines and long, almost ridiculous looking districts are an indication of a gerrymander. But as I showed on the previous slide, they are not necessarily one. Sometimes they are the best districts because they best reflect the lived experience of communities. The only way we're going to know is if the public is involved and is guiding the redistricting process. So what is the alternative to gerrymandering? We believe that voters should choose their politicians. Politicians should not choose their voters. California Common Cause, like the League of Women Voters, advocates for diverse community-run redistricting commissions that redraw district lines transparently with large volumes of community participation and public input. So we're going to talk a little bit now about laws that attempt to stop gerrymandering and abuse of the redistricting process. So Prop 11 created the California Citizens Redistricting Commission, the nation's first fully independent redistricting commission, in which 14 regular members of the community selected in a year-long application process are put in a position to redraw our state, Senate, and Assembly district lines. This was backed by California Common Cause, the League of Women Voters, and some others. This was opposed at the time by the state Democratic Party and the state Republican Party. 2 years later, we went back to the ballot initiative, we went back to the ballot to expand the CRC to redraw California's congressional district lines as well. And since this time, because the first Citizens Redistricting Commission was a smashing success, and we're going to talk more about that in just a minute, other states around the nation have sought to emulate the California model. It is seen nationwide as the high watermark for how to do redistricting right. Another more recent law, though, is the one I mentioned earlier, AB 849 from 2019, which standardizes the redistricting process, the criteria upon which cities and counties must draw their district lines, and institutionalizes community access to the redistricting process. So specifically, it prohibits partisan gerrymandering. That is to say, it says that you cannot draw local district lines in a way that systematically advantages one political party, right, the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, or what have you. Now, of course, these local elections are nonpartisan elections, but oftentimes people, including incumbent politicians, know what party they belong to and what party their colleagues belong to. It requires the districts be compact and contiguous. It requires the communities of interest be kept together. They cannot be sliced or diced and cut into multiple districts. It requires 4 public hearings at a minimum. There can be more for residents to come forward and give comment. It requires some degree, a good faith effort at community outreach to community organizations and outreach to local media, including non-English speaking media. It requires maps to be posted for the public to view and for the public to react to before they are finally approved. And it requires some measure of translation assistance for the larger non-English speaking communities within a city or within a county. This was, as I mentioned at the outset of my presentation, the first meaningful form of local redistricting law since the 1940s. Prior to this, it was the wild, wild west, and cities and counties could redraw, incumbent politicians could redraw their district lines with almost no public oversight or public participation. And of course, that led to a variety of abuses. Now, AB 849 is good. It makes improvements to the local redistricting process in cities like Sunnyvale and like cities like Cupertino and counties around the state. But we currently have an opportunity for the city of Sunnyvale to go further. It can use an independent redistricting commission or an independent redistricting committee, similar to the state system, in which a group of citizens or just residents, you don't necessarily have to make them US citizens, a group of regular community members, not political insiders, not lobbyists, not special interests, who come from the community, are put in charge of overseeing the redistricting process. This is a photo on the left of the California Citizens Redistricting Commission from the 2010 cycle. It included regular folks, a rancher, a bookstore owner, nonprofit professionals, philanthropic professionals, a couple professors, one person who was the former head of the United States Census Bureau. Lots and lots of different people of varying backgrounds representing the broad diversity of the state, racial diversity, gender diversity, and geographic diversity. And they were able to lead a community-driven process in which they held over 100 meetings up and down the state of California for people to come forward and talk about what they wanted their district lines to look like. The result was so successful that many years later, Harvard University, the John F. Kennedy School of Government, awarded the Citizens Redistricting Commission a national award for innovations in government. And as I said before, it has been recreated, is a model that has been recreated around the nation. And as we're about to see in a few minutes, it is a model that is being recreated at the local level around California. So, independent redistricting commissions. There are 3 kinds of redistricting commissions the city of Sunnyvale or any city or any county for that matter can adopt. The first of the 3 is an independent redistricting commission. This is the best practice if the goal is to allow zero politicalization of the process. There is an inherent conflict of interest when elected officials draw their own districts. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, I trust my local elected officials. They seem like good people. They work in the best interests of my community, and all of that is completely fair. That is not the case in all instances, and it is simply a fact that politicians being able to draw their own districts means they're choosing their own voters, and they will run in districts that they themselves have designed, and that presents an inherent conflict of interest. An independent redistricting commission is the commissioners come from the community. They go through an application process. They are evaluated and appointed by a trusted third-party entity. Details there vary. Some cities and counties, for example, have the county elections office evaluate applicants. Some have a panel of retired judges evaluate the applicants. Some have the city's ethics commission, if it has an ethics commission, evaluate the applicants. Some have a charter review committee or charter review commission evaluate the applicants. Basically, the idea is to find some sort of entity, third-party entity that is not the city council or not the county board of supervisors, that is trusted by the public. And there's a variety of constraints that you can put on the application process or the selection process. You can, when you're designing an independent redistricting commission, you can say the third-party entity doing the selecting shall look for X, Y, and Z criteria, or they shall disqualify anyone who has a conflict of interest defined as A, B, and C, or they should attempt to prioritize diversity of kinds, LMNOP. So you can, giving a third-party entity control over the evaluation and selection process does not mean giving control whole hog over to that entity. Commissions are designed with a set of selection criteria in the governing documents, the charter amendment or ordinance that creates them. Now, one key element of an independent redistricting commission is that the commission and the commission alone has the power to adopt new district maps. Where are independent commissions used? In a number of cities, including some in the Bay Area, Berkeley, Oakland, San Francisco, and in 3 counties, some of the biggest counties in the state of California. Now, on the other end of the spectrum is the Advisory Redistricting Commission. Here, members of the Redistricting Commission are appointed by incumbent politicians, so typically appointed by the city council and by the mayor, or some other combination of local elected officials. Importantly, the Advisory Redistricting Commission, unlike the Independent Commission, does not have the power to select the final map. It leads a public process, it hears from the public, it draws a recommended map. It then sends it to the city council or the county board of supervisors, which can then adopt the map, modify the map, or ignore the map. I believe the county of Santa Clara 10 years ago had an Advisory Redistricting Commission. It went through the work of creating a map, it sent it to the county board of supervisors, and the county board of supervisors promptly threw it out and drew their own map. So Advisory Redistricting Commissions do have that limitation. They are useful, however, in that they typically do increase public participation in the redistricting process. Now, there are some that encounter real problems, and if anything, they deepen public cynicism about the redistricting process. I'm thinking of LA, where 10 years ago, the commission included political insiders, lobbyists, people that were obvious cronies and mouthpieces for the LA City Council. People who were too independent were yanked by their appointing city council member and replaced by someone who would be a more loyal ally for them. And the whole thing was sort of known to be a charade from the beginning, and was attacked in the press in the LA Times as a phony commission from the beginning. So an Advisory Redistricting Commission can have some positives. It also has some real vulnerabilities. Advisory Redistricting Commissions, as you might expect, are quite popular among local governments. That's because the city councils and the county boards of supervisors that create them retain final say in the district maps. But here are some places, local jurisdictions across California, in which Advisory Redistricting Commissions are used. And then lastly, you have the blended model, known as a hybrid redistricting commission, which incorporates elements of the independent model and the advisory model. Typically, you do have third-party selection, so that you cut sitting incumbents out of the selection process. Now, there are some that have a combination of both. They allow sitting incumbents to appoint a few people, and then they have a selection process for the rest. But by and large, hybrid redistricting commissions have a third-party selection process. But the difference is that the power to adopt the final district map is combined between the commission and the sitting governing body. They essentially, there's a variety of ways you can implement this, but they both have a say in the final map. So, for example, in the city of Chula Vista, which uses a hybrid redistricting commission, the commission draws its recommended map, it sends it to the city council. The city council then has the opportunity to make a number of suggestions and amendments, which it then sends back to the hybrid redistricting commission. That commission then can choose whether to accept or reject the recommendations it got from council, and then approves the final map. So there's a voice for the city council in this process, in that example, but the commission has the final say. The hybrid model is only used in a handful of cities, 2 in San Diego County and 2 in the Central Valley. Now, you may be wondering, what are the timelines for the redistricting process, and specifically for commissions? Well, everything is very up in the air in 2021 because we still don't know, as incredible as this is, we still don't know when the Census Bureau is going to make redistricting data available. Typically, it would be in the spring of 2021. But then we were informed that the Census Bureau, because COVID delayed its census operations in the year of 2020, it delayed the data gathering process in 2020. We were informed, the public was informed, that the Census Bureau was going to delay its release of redistricting data by an equivalent amount of time, or almost an equivalent amount of time, which would have pushed the availability of redistricting data to summer of 2021. But then the Trump administration announced that it was going to rush the end of the census and rush redistricting data and release it as early as December or January. And so we still don't have clarity, which is quite remarkable. But here's what I can tell you. For a city that uses the November 2022 general election as its next election, that is to say, it does not use a primary, does not use the primary election, a city that for whom the next election will be the November 2022 general election, their final deadline for redistricting is April of 2022. So there is quite a bit of time for cities to make a choice. If they make a choice to move to a commission or a county, frankly, to move to a commission in early 2021, they can pass it via ordinance. Now, I would not recommend, you can do it via charter amendment, but you would need to go to the voters on the ballot via charter amendment. You'd have to do that at the November 2022 election, which defeats the purpose because redistricting will be over by that time. So a city would presumably use an ordinance in early 2021. You can have 2, 3, or 4 months to publicize the application, to receive applications, to evaluate applicants, and to complete the selection process, and could theoretically start the redistricting process in the summer when we know redistricting data will be available, and the redistricting commission would have a period of roughly 8 months or a little bit more to complete the redistricting process, which is a healthy amount of time for the redistricting process to be completed. If a city or county delays considerably into 2021 and makes a choice to convert to a commission model late spring or early summer, it is really pushing it and will have to compress its redistricting process in a way that probably does not serve the public well. Now, what are our practices, our view around best practices for redistricting commissions? First, we think independent redistricting, we think that commissions are a best practice because they empower the community. They give the community much more of a say and involve the community much more than the traditional politician-run model. We also believe that commissioners who serve should be qualified, diverse, and impartial. That's important. We don't want to have the commission stacked with people who are partial to one political party or one faction of local government. And we think that commissioners should be selected in a way that is accessible to everyone and is open and transparent. We believe that residents should be highly engaged in the process. The city of Sunnyvale led a fantastic districting process when it received a CVRA claim, and it held a ton of hearings. It really went the extra mile to hear from the community and to let community testimony and community maps drive the process. That's the model you want to emulate in the redistricting. A community testimony should be honored in the drawing of the maps. The VRA, Federal Voting Rights Act compliance, should be honored when drawing the new maps. And ultimately, you want fair maps that allow for fair representation in local government. Our view is the best way to do that is through an independent redistricting commission. Now, if you want to see an independent redistricting commission work, you can watch the California Citizens Redistricting Commission, which is seated and working. They are having meetings now, basically every week. They may be breaking now for the holidays, but for the last several months, they've been meeting almost every week and having a bunch of really technical but really important startup conversations, like who should we hire for our Voting Rights Act council? Who should we hire for our demographer and map drawer? How do we want to engage the public? We have to reach 40 million people and to bring them into this process. How do we go about doing that? What are the leading community organizations and civil rights organizations that are going to be watching our work, and how can we get to know them better, and so on. Every single one of their meetings is live streamed at this website, wedrawthelines.ca.gov, and at that website you can also find a calendar of future meetings. We would love to work with members of the community on this. We can offer a wide range of resources, including educational materials, outreach materials, and we can host forums like this one over Zoom. We also, and I should have noted this on the slide, but I didn't, we also run localredistricting.org, which is a one-stop shop for a ton of resources on local redistricting in California. And it enables you to use an ordinance generator to answer a bunch of questions about what you want your redistricting commission to look like. And it pops out a ready-to-go ordinance with the legal language taken care of that you can then introduce at your city or in your county. And if you're in Northern California, we have someone who's dedicated to this work, helping communities bring redistricting commissions to their cities and their counties. That's Helen Greco, and her contact information is on the slide. I just want to thank you all for being with us today and thinking hard about how we want to redraw our district lines. This can feel esoteric, it can feel technical, and yet it really determines the public's faith in our election process, and it determines who has representation and voice for the next decade. Thanks so much for your time, and with that, I'm going to stop my screen share. Hi, folks.
That was terrific. And before you start with some questions for you, I just want to put in a plug for Helen, who is just terrific to work with. In your remarks, at the very beginning, you used an abbreviation, and just for our listeners, I thought we would just expand on that so everybody knows what it stands for, which is CVRA, California Voting Rights Act.
I apologize. Yes, the California Voting Rights Act.
So I got that right. Excellent. And one question on census before we get more into districting. You had mentioned that the Trump administration may release the information as early as December or January. Out of curiosity, is it possible for the new administration to revisit that data?
Yeah, it's unknown. This is unprecedented. And so there are legal experts who are examining exactly that question. If they have an answer at this point, I don't know what it is. But we are in uncharted territory if that happens.
Thank you. And just starting at sort of the high level around districting, I started to write a question here. I'm going to say it sort of two ways, but does districting make sense for every city, or maybe said slightly differently? Should all cities that are at large shift to districts?
Oh, sure. So let me start by distinguishing between districting and redistricting for our audience. Districting is the process by which a city that uses at-large elections shifts to district elections. Redistricting is when a city that already, or city or county, that already uses districts redraws those districts after the decennial census to account for population change and other factors. So, Tracy, it's an excellent question. Thank you. There are a lot of things that make district elections incredibly valuable. So first and foremost, it requires someone to run for office in a much smaller jurisdiction. Instead of running in the entire city, you're running in one district within the city, which means you have to raise less money. You're less dependent on major donors and special interests. You have the opportunity to actually go door knocking on every single home or on every single street within your district, which you couldn't do citywide. And it also means that every single neighborhood, by definition, has representation on council. One of the things that happens in at-large systems is that the neighborhoods that have money and power and access to wealth and access to political insiders often generate all the city council members or most of the city council members. Under a district system, every single neighborhood has a district representative. The other thing that is easier with district elections is it's usually minority communities that are unable to achieve representation or elect a representative in an at-large way are able to do so in a district, under a district system. So for example, the city of Santa Clara, which I'm sure many of our audience here today know well, had never elected a person of color in its entire history, despite being an incredibly diverse city. In the first election, using a district election system, it elected its first Asian American council member. Now, having said all of that, and I'm sorry this answer is so long, Tracy, but having said all of that, the fact is that there is no one size fits all necessarily under election systems. There may be some cities that use an at-large system that have representation from all the different neighborhoods in the city, have representation for all the different racial and ethnic communities, have gender diversity, have all these other things, and are very content with how their city is being run under an at-large system. If that's the case, there's no need to change it.
Thank you very much. There's, as Sunnyvale has started to consider independent redistricting, we've heard a number of criticisms, and I'm going to share with you two and get your reaction. I'll give them to you one at a time.
Sure.
One is, how could citizens selected for a commission how could they possibly be more informed than the city council itself about the needs, the shape, the demographics of the city?
So, two answers. One, anybody who draws district lines will have the assistance of, and this applies for city council members, an independent commission, anybody, will have the assistance of a professional demographer and professional counsel. So a professional demographer is somebody who has all the data you need to draw district lines. They work with mapping software every single day of their lives. They have helped in almost certainly dozens or hundreds of other cities and counties redistrict, and they will be there to support whoever draws the district lines. And so that would be support available to anybody who draws the district lines. But more to the point, it is not a question of whether the line drawing people have enough education or knowledge, because it should be the community and the public that is in the driver's seat. So what should happen in a well-designed redistricting process is that there are tons and tons of hearings in different parts of the city in which people can come forward and they can make their voices heard about what they want their district to look like because of where their community works, lives, plays, worships, etc. And then that community data essentially forms the districts with the sort of guiding hand of the demographer and a commission or frankly a city council. That is to say, there are so many inputs coming from the community that drive the process that it is not about having one super well-informed person at the top of the process who gets to dictate the right shape for the map.
Yeah, another criticism that's closely allied is an independent commission comes together, often completes its task, moves on, and it ultimately has no accountability, unlike elected officials who are accountable and want to be reelected. And so they are incented to draw good lines. Otherwise, the citizens will punish them. How do you respond to that criticism?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually, I think, oftentimes quite the opposite. So if you look at, states like Wisconsin, if you look at Ohio, if you look at North Carolina, these are states where one political party has drawn the district lines such that they are impermeable to accountability. They draw lines that they know have arranged voters in such a way that they will get elected and reelected, even if there's public outrage about a particular choice that they've made. The whole purpose of drawing bad lines is to insulate themselves from accountability. And now I'm not suggesting that the city of Sunnyvale would do such a thing. And I'm not suggesting that any local government would do such a thing. But the fact is that the sort of incumbent protection shenanigans that are possible when sitting incumbents draw their own lines are designed to protect them from being removed from office for any decision they make, including a decision about how to draw districts.
I have one last question for you. You, at the very end of your presentation, you touched on the hybrid model, but also illustrated that it had a very low adoption, even though it seemed to have some pretty interesting features that could accommodate both sides of the equation. Can you talk to why it has such low adoption?
Yeah, sure. So I think that the answer to that is that when city councils and boards of supervisors choose to adopt redistricting commissions, they go with the advisory route because it gives them the final say in what the map looks like. And when the citizens put a redistricting commission on the ballot, they choose the independent route because they want the gold standard in independence and they want to eliminate any possible conflicts of interest. And so when those are the two primary routes, those are the two primary outcomes you get. The advisory route is, I'm sorry, the hybrid route would come about in a situation in which, well, it can come about in a couple different ways, like Chula Vista was a ballot measure, but it is something that might emerge if the public gets involved, tells the city council what the public wants. The city council is receptive. The council and the public work together to hash out the best possible process, and it's more likely to emerge in a situation in which you have a collaboration, I think, between engaged members of the community and the people responsible for passing it.
Thank you very much. That's the last of my questions. And on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Cupertino Sunnyvale, I just want to thank you very much for taking time out. You're on the East Coast. We know it's late, and we thank you very much for this. And as you mentioned, the League and Comcast has had a very long partnership together, and we look forward to continuing that as Sunnyvale moves forward in its process. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity to join you. I have nothing but enormous respect for the League of Women Voters, both at the state level and locally. So thank you for everything you do, and thank you for the chance to join you this evening.
You have a good evening. Thank you.